Much for coming. Thank you guys so much for coming. My name is Dana. I'm going to help facilitate this talk today. We would like to start first and foremost, before getting into anything, with a territorial land acknowledgement. For those of us, particularly in so named British Columbia, we are often on unceded territory. Unceded territory, for those who are not familiar, means this land was never surrendered, never sold, never won in a battle. It's simply being occupied by those of us who are here, and there are traditional land and title holders who deserve to be acknowledged, and we want to make sure we do that. So myself, I am calling from unceded Katzie, Kwantlen, Tsawwassen, and Coquitlam First Nations. And I wanted to pass it to perhaps Badger or Cheyenne to offer territorial land acknowledgement if someone is open to doing that. Badger, are you on here? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I can do this. So I'm here on the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in the area we now know as Vancouver. And yeah, we invite this to anyone else who wants to check in and do a land acknowledgement from where they are.
My name is Cheyenne, or Strawberry is my camp name if you know me from Fairy Creek, and I am on the unceded territories right now of the Lillooet Nation. Lovely to see everybody.
Anyone else want to say what traditional lands they are on? I think you could maybe unmute yourself, or use a finger will unmute you.
I'm on the unceded land of the Sunamo First Nation.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm on unceded traditional Stolo territory. I'm Ava. It's nice to be here. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you, Ava. So going forward, we want to make sure that we keep that in mind, that all of this work that we are doing is on unceded territory, and that we want to make sure that our actions are in accordance with the traditions of the people who've been caring for this land for thousands of years before our ancestors even knew it existed. So with that being said, I would like to open it up to just some quick check-ins. So it'll be a popcorn style. If anyone would like to go and just say, how are you feeling today? Where are you coming from? What are you feeling in this moment coming to this meeting? Is there anything that would help you to be more grounded and present, or just sort of a quick check-in? Anyone can take their mic off mute and just go ahead and pop in.
I saw a video of Roger talking to Extinction Rebellion Australia last night, and it was just an excerpt from it was a long video, but the excerpt was 20 minutes long, and it was pretty intense, and I'm pretty stoked to hear what he has to say to us.
Stoked is a good word. Anyone else?
My name is Donna. I'm on the lands of the Hunkaminam and Squamish speaking people. I'm really grateful to be here today. And I'm hoping that with Cheyenne's presence and with Roger here, that we could talk about Indigenous sovereignty as a basis for climate activism work, and that the two go together. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Donna. Any other takers? Quick check-in, or should we move on?
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to hearing people's ideas.
That's good. I'm also very excited. This is an awesome conversation. I'm very excited to be engaged in.
I just want to say, grateful for everyone for giving up their time to be here, and the fact that all of us in different areas are open to this conversation and with the best interests of our planet in mind. We have these dialogues in our different circles and across different circles.
Yeah, it's good to be with you guys. I got to spend a bit of time in Fairy Creek this summer, but school started in September, so it's just been like extra challenging to kind of get back. And so just having ways to be involved in this fight, you know, in the city and kind of keep the momentum here, it's definitely on my mind and heart.
Excellent. Well, without further ado then, I think we should introduce our guest speakers. So we are very privileged today to have Shy-Anne Gunville, who is an Afro-Indigenous land defender and member of the Little Red River Cree Nation, who's been living at the blockades full time for the past 4 months. And we also have Roger Hallam, who's calling in from the UK, co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. We're hoping to discuss nonviolent civil disobedience and civil resistance in its many forms, including what's been happening here in Canada in the woods at Adactix Fairy Creek, as well as in urban actions taking place in cities across the country and across the world. So if I could pass it off to Shy-Anne to start, if you would like to introduce yourself, speak a little bit about who you are and the work you do, and then I'll pass it to Roger as well.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Shy-Anne. My camp name is Strawberry. And as mentioned, I've been out at the Fairy Creek blockade for, I think it's almost been close to, I think, 5 months. I think the time is ticking. I've actually just come home for the first time for some respite as I needed to take care of my body and my mental my mental state, as well, as things have been pretty intense. I guess where I would like to start is just kind of giving a bit of a rundown. So it's been an interesting couple weeks as Fairy Creek is going through some up and downs. I mean, there's been an injunction, and on September 28th, the court, Judge Thompson, ruled that he didn't want to extend the injunction for quite a few different reasons, but one of the biggest reasons being just the way that the police have been conducting themselves. There's been a lot of police violence and brutality on the front lines, as well as I started to take a breath. I actually have a neurological disease. And so when I get a little bit nervous, sometimes my speech becomes impaired. So I'm just going to take a second just to breathe here. I've actually, part of the reason that I'm home right now is just that my health has been flaring a little bit. So so just with the recent ruling, the judge, I guess, just wants to not, sorry.
That's all right, take your time.
Sorry, I almost wanted to cancel today just because of the way that I've been feeling. I've been having a couple seizures, so it just kind of affects my mobility and my speech. So so just going back to what I was saying, there's just the judge has ruled, Judge Thompson ruled on the 28th that he didn't want to extend the injunction. And so at that point, skeptical, I didn't really know, but a small celebration happened. So enforcement did leave. They were still enforcing, but not as intense. There was some changes with how land defenders were now approaching the front lines, and the way that the police were enforcing. So police were still coming out to the blockades. They were still, also just want to let you guys know that there are trees being fell out there. So logging is happening currently out at Fairy Creek, and because of the way that enforcement was happening, they weren't able to attack land offenders and arrest them the same way. There were still a few arrests that happened at Fairy Creek, but in terms of we were able to take some land back. There was some camps that are being set up, and so a little bit of celebrating there. But on Friday, there was an appeal from Bill Jones. And unfortunately, has been able to put the injunction back in place. So
I think your sound just got muffled. Sorry to interrupt, your sound.
No, thank you for letting me know. Does that sound better?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I'm not sure where, could you hear everything I said, or was it just like the last?
Yeah, you were just saying like that the injunction, although it hadn't been extended, now another judge has come in and granted them the extension while they wait for their appeal.
Yeah. So, as you're saying, it poses a lot of, I mean, for me, it poses a lot of anxiety because now enforcement is coming back out. We, and the judge ruled on Friday that they were in favor of the injunction, and as well as that they felt that the logging industry would be impacted if they did not go through with the injunction for the next month. So that's kind of where the long and the short of where things are at right now at Fairy Creek. Yeah.
Fairy Creek, I think everyone will probably know prior to what has just happened, the basics of Fairy Creek, but in case anyone is not aware, this blockade has been around for 13 months, I believe, just over a year, with over 1,100 arrests. People are camping and living in the woods to ensure that these trees are not cut down. It's been a very intense situation, and it has just recently been deemed the largest act of civil disobedience in Canada. So this win was really great, and of course we have the setback of a corrupt system that is favoring extractive industry. May I? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh no, sorry. I actually didn't know how much. Yeah, I wasn't sure how much people knew about that. I can chat more about like the indigenous. Yeah, let me know.
Yeah, we can go deeper into it. Perhaps I'll just pass it to Roger to introduce himself as well and the work that's going on there with Extinction Rebellion, so we can see 2 different instances of civil disobedience. Can I pass it to you, Roger?
Yeah, hi Shy-Anne, thanks very much. And thanks very much for having me from the UK. I feel a bit nervous, but hopefully it's going to be okay. I've had a long day actually, it's 8 p.m. in the evening here. So hopefully I'm not going to be reasonably coherent. Anyway, just to say a little bit about me, as some of you may know, I've been helped to co-found Extinction Rebellion about 3 years ago, and before that I did quite a few years of field research on campaigns on how to make them more effective and what have you. And really, I'm in the very privileged position, I suppose, of being able to help groups around the world design campaigns. And I suppose I'm very passionate about trying to get these campaigns to work and what makes campaigns work. And there's some similarities. And really, a lot of what I might say in this session is really not so much what I think, but like what people have discovered through different campaigns I've worked with. And I suppose my general orientation is we've got to start winning because there isn't the time, right? This is not 1995 where you can do a campaign and, you know, give or take. It's like 2021. The climate emergency is upon us big time, all around the world. And I suppose what I feel is that we've got to have a culture of openness and dialogue so that people from different traditions and backgrounds and experiences can come together and share what works and what doesn't work, and what's difficult and what's not difficult. And this needs to be done all around the world. And there are some common sort of themes, I suppose. So yeah, that's really what I do. And obviously I'm here to speak a little bit about this conundrum, as it were, of traditional environmental protests sort of being where the bad things are happening, and the idea of going to cities where the people in control are doing the bad things, as you might say. So yeah, I don't know if, shall I leave it there? And then I'd be interested in Shan talking a little bit more about the, you know, how it's been successful to the extent it has, and what works and what doesn't work. And then maybe I can talk about my situation a little bit in the UK or in other places. I don't know. Does that make sense? Or
I think that's excellent. Yeah, we can, we're going to get into the nitty gritties about what's working, what's not working, how can we grow together. That was a great introduction. And I'd like to just touch quickly on our principles and values. So when we engage in a meeting, we just want to quickly go over our principles and values as well. So, Badger, are you available to read the principles and values, or is there someone who wanted to go through that? Or read and read out?
I can do it if I can. Do you have them available just in front of me, just so I get them all right?
It's not on the agenda here. 1 second. So
hold on, I've got a leaflet. I've got a leaflet. I can go.
Okay. Maybe while Badger is just grabbing that, Zane, did you want to mention any upcoming talks or trainings for Fairy Creek and Extinction Rebellion that we've got after this?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're going to have a joint NVDA training on the 13th because a lot of people are going up to Fairy Creek, and also because the October Rebellion is coming up. And yeah, just to briefly describe what the October Rebellion is, there's going to be 14 days of actions on the roads in Vancouver. And on the 25th, we're shutting down the Vancouver airport. And in the days leading up, a lot of the bridges and the major intersections. Yeah, so on the 13th, we're going to have a legal training and an NVDA training so that people, if they have any questions about arrests and all of that, we can answer them there. And also, it also applies to people going up to Fairy Creek. And I think you can find it on Facebook. I'll post a link in the chat.
Okay, I've got these ready. I just want to say I'm part of Extinction Rebellion Vancouver, but I've also been to Fairy Creek twice. So yeah, it's so good that everyone's coming together on this. I'm just gonna read out the 10 principles and values of Extinction Rebellion. And this is how we just kind of operate as a movement. So number 1, we have a shared vision of change, creating a world that is fit for generations to come. 2, we set our mission on what is necessary, mobilizing 3.5% of the population to achieve system change. Number 3, we need a regenerative culture, creating a culture which is healthy, resilient, and adaptable. Number 4, we openly challenge ourselves and our toxic system, leaving our comfort zones to take action for change. Number 5, we value reflection and learning, this is obviously part of this, following a cycle of action, reflection, learning, and planning for more action, learning from other movements and contexts, as well as our own experiences. Very good, we're all doing this here today. We welcome everyone and every part of everyone, working actively to create safer and more accessible spaces. Number 7, we actively mitigate for power, breaking down hierarchies of power for more equitable participation. Number 8, we avoid blaming and shaming. We live in a toxic system currently, but no individual is to blame. 9, we are a non-violent network. Using non-violent strategy and tactics is the most effective way to bring about change. And finally, number 10, we are based on autonomy and decentralization. We collectively create the structures we need to challenge power. And anyone who follows these goals and values can take action in the name of Extinction Rebellion. And I really like that part. I think we saw rebellions in the UK where it was rebellions of one, where even if they didn't have a group, as long as someone followed those principles, they could go take an action. So.
Thank you so much, Roger. I just wanted to make sure we read those out because we will be doing some questions and answers in breakout rooms. So I want everyone to keep in mind to be respectful to each other, no blaming or shaming, and everyone is included. All right, so to continue on with our dialogue, I was just going to pose a question, but if there's something else that you'd rather speak on, I was going to go back to Cheyenne and ask, 1,100 arrests up at Fairy Creek. What do you think is engaging people and bringing them there? What's working and what's not working?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I mean, we've got some really dedicated, I would say that we have such dedicated land defenders that selflessly give time and time again. And I think without them, and all of the support, so I would say like all of the people that are at Fairy Creek with everything that they do, whether they're on the front line, they're cooking, they're bringing in supplies, and they're media, like everything. I think everybody's working really hard. I know there's a lot of really tired land defenders. I mean, they've got a nice like 10-day break. And now enforcement's going to be ramping up. So whether I think we're on Sunday today, so usually we don't get enforcement on Sundays out at Fairy Creek. So tomorrow, I mean, it is a holiday. Let's pray, but we'll see. So I mean, so at that point, there'll be but so I'm just grateful that everybody got a small break so that we can kind of get going and regroup as a collective, like sitting down to really like plan out methodically how things are going to be looking over the next little bit, what plans of actions are going to be in place. And I would say a lot of things that have worked in the past are like our dragons, there's a camp called Waterfall. I recognize a couple of people here that have spent some time up at Waterfall. So Waterfall was a camp that was never taken by enforcement. So a lot of bipods, sleeping dragons, and those things were really successful in keeping out enforcement. I think another thing is that we've got all of these other blockades that are happening right now. So I think in my mind right now, like really taxing the resources of the RCMP for the green enforcement and blue enforcement officers. So we know that there's only a certain amount that they can deploy throughout the province. So I think in the future, it's going to be really thinking about how we're going to be able to, in solidarity with all of the movements, be able to really exhaust these resources. How are we going to really exhaust RCMP and really, so those are the things that I'm really thinking about now, like in the future on the grounds at Fairy Creek is, kind of doing those same things. Things have changed, I would say, over the last couple of weeks in terms of how we were doing things because we had industry actively taking down trees. So you know, a couple tactics changed where we weren't putting in dragons, we weren't putting up bipods. People were, and we didn't really have camps, so people were now like sleeping in the forest and doing something called logger cops and loggers. So people were hiding in the forest, and so we had enforcement protecting the loggers coming in via helicopters, and then people would hide in the forest. And yeah, so they would hide in the forest, and then they would have like air horns or whistles. And so when trees were going to be felled, and or I would say actually more of when industry was coming into the cut blocks, then there would be, you know, one point of contact that would kind of let the loggers know that there's a bunch of people kind of hiding, and then air horns would be sounded. So that was one thing that people have been doing over the last little bit. That's going to, I think, start to change as now we're going to have enforcement coming in. I know as a collective group right now, people are really at the drawing boards figuring out what that's going to look like over the next little bit and how we're going to keep enforcement out. Another thing that we were doing in the past was what we call blobs, so like linking arms, kind of standing in front of either like main roads or in front of like excavators or whatever the machinery has been. And yeah, you know, so in terms of like what worked and what didn't work, I would say blobs they work, and they also can be really, it's kind of vulnerable. I've been in many blobs. I think I've been arrested 6 or 7 times. And yeah, blobs work, but they really intimidate enforcement. And so when we're linking arms and we're singing songs and we're in front of enforcement, it's when they really come up and just start like, you know, quite being violent that way. And it slows them down, you know, and so that's, you know, definitely one of our tactics is trying to slow them down and keep them out. But yeah, a lot of things happen within that with violence. So yeah, I think those are some of the things. Yeah.
Do you mind if I just highlight a couple things that you said? Yeah. I thought, so if people didn't catch that, the RCMP are helicoptering in loggers and dropping them at the top of the mountain because of the roads are blocked. Like, to consider how much money is being spent to do things like that is pretty exceptional. You also mentioned, so cops and loggers, you're sort of hiding in between the trees and just using sound to indicate your presence. So that's a really interesting feature of the forest. I was going to just ask a question on that. That's a great way that the forest has been a tactic or has been a strategy for you to hide between the trees. Have you found that being so far away in the forest has made you more vulnerable in any way, like at the whim of the RCMP because it's a stretch for the media to get there? Or
yeah, I think there's pros and cons to that one for sure. I think that because I think arrests are still being made, but I think if you had a really good hiding spot and you weren't able, if they didn't find you, it was good. And they do, you know, they are pulling people out of the forest. And I think, I think there were successes to it. And then I have heard other people voice just the vulnerability of being in the forest and feeling a little bit nervous just because it is an active logging area. So, and just the way that the loggers actually don't care about the people. The loggers are super violent and they really don't give a crap about the safety of the protesters and that. So that kind of plays into it, but
and less witnesses then too, right? Because there was a big issue with the RCMP blocking media. I believe that several media outlets even took them to court, and the media outlets won. They were told that they absolutely had access, but doesn't mean the RCMP are going to comply.
And that's the thing, right? Like what I've witnessed is the RCMP will do what they want. And I've actually been on the front lines many times where I've experienced like the last blob that I was in, I think was on September 9th. I don't think we've been doing any blobs since, but that was that day. I think they took out 71 people. So we had 71 people on the ground, and we were kind of in a blob like this. And so there was a corporal that would stand at the front, and then he would give this sign, and like a row of RCMP would walk up, and the first row of RCMP that came up went and then like blocked all of the media and then pushed them back. Like I'm so bad at yards, but it was a long amount of yards away, and they couldn't see, and they literally just stood there with like 10, maybe like 7 enforcement officers in front of them, you know, and this has happened for months. I mean, they pushed them so far back, and we can be lucky for a little bit. We're in the beginning, maybe we can get a few shots in, but yeah, just another way of silencing and not actually being able to get the whole story out there, you know? Yeah.
Roger, can I put it to you now? Is there, did you want to weigh in on these types of strategies and vulnerabilities and things that have been happening there versus what's happening in the streets with Extinction Rebellion?
Yeah, well, what's going through my head is like how to bring together the many ways in which this Fairy Creek campaign is working with 1,000 arrests and going on for a year, with the potential advantages of bringing that drama into the city. So the perspective that I come from in terms of helping to set up Extinction Rebellion was a deep frustration with the inability of the environmental movement to gain attention from the public sphere, you know, like people just don't talk about it. They're not talking about it on the talk shows. They're not talking about it on the BBC. And there was a long tradition in the UK of going to coal mines, you know, going to gas stations, going to places on the, you know, in the periphery of the UK, basically, and nothing happened. There was something in Wales, for instance, you know, 300 people turned up and they closed down this place, and it was a massive logistical operation. And no one really gave a damn, if the truth be known, you know, like, and I'm in the business of trying to work out what's going on there. So I think what was going on there from the UK experience was it's not being pushed into the face of the public, to be blunt, right? So what we did, as people may know, when we are thinking about Extinction Rebellion, you know, we had a number of innovations as well. And one of them was, we're going to the capital city to push it into their faces, to push it into the faces of the elites, the media, and the general public. But we're not carrying on like this, right? This obscenity towards nature, towards the next generation, towards the global south. So I was really motivated by that sort of intelligent rage, you know, that we're out of time and we have to do something that's provocative and outrageous and transgressive and right under the windows of the BBC, as you might say. So as people may know, like, you know, we had this massive success in 2019 with, you know, similar sort of arrest to Fairy Creek, like 1,200 arrests in 10 days. And it was all over the papers after about 4 or 5 days. We were there for 10 days. We closed down the whole of central London. And, you know, there was debates in Parliament and there's dozens of interviews. And I think when I was helping to design that, you know, there's the tactical thing, which was, you know, that's where the elites are, that's where the media is, that's where the general public thinks about it. So it's like, that's where you get the message across. But I just want to mention like a deeper, more profound sort of analysis, as you might say, which is this idea that the environment isn't anymore, or never was, a little thing over there that we have to think about every now and again. It's at the heart of what it means to be responsible to the next generations, to our ancestors, to the land, to the indigenous people. All these things are coming together in a meta crisis. And what that means is there's a justification for causing hell, you know, whatever it non-violently takes. And in the UK, we were very inspired by the Global South civil resistance episodes where, you know, thousands of people go to the capital city and they just fucking stay there, right? They're not going until something happens. And that seemed enormously powerful, both materially, but also emotionally, you know, in terms of capturing a mood. And there's also a long tradition in the UK anyway, and I suppose in other countries, of working people, you know, coming from the valleys, from the coal mines and descending on the capital. And, you know, that goes back several hundred years, that it's the capital where the government is, and the government has ultimate responsibility to sort stuff out. You know, it's not actually the companies in the last analysis, it's the government. And they're supposed to exist to protect the people. You know, that's the tradition we had in the UK anyway, you know, with the English Civil War, without sounding too, you know, whatever about it. But, you know, in the country I'm from, we had that tradition, and obviously it's gone around the world, that you don't put up with tyranny, you don't put up with shit, you don't put up with this stuff, right? No one's above the law, and the highest law is that the law protects the people. And if something transgresses that, you have an absolute right and duty to rebel. And if that isn't the case today, fuck knows when it is, right? It's just like, this is it, guys. This is it, right? If we haven't got the you know, the wherefore to rebel now, then we never are. So, you know, that's sort of what I've been trying to work around, and there's loads of moving parts. So I'll just shut up in a minute, but I'd just like to say, I think there's a potential combination, because there's enormous tactical and political advantages of going to where the crap stuff is happening, because it's so powerful, right? You've got the vision, you know, you've got the people in front of the trees. So there's no question about that. So it's not like either or, but maybe there's a role for coming to the city as well and closing the damn thing down by all means possible, to say, this is not just out there, this is at the heart of what it is to live on these lands, or, you know, there's various ways of doing it. So I should shut there. I'll say a little bit about Insulate Britain in a bit, because that's sort of interesting, but, which I'm involved in at the moment. Yeah, I'm interested to see, is that something, Shy-Anne, that sort of just crossed people's minds, or is this a weird idea? I don't know.
Definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I do want to say that this is all on the provincial government right now. And so just to touch what you're saying there, is that like this, you know, the provincial government right now is like putting the Indigenous community in the middle. They've put the RCMP in the middle. They have yet to actually do anything about putting any policy in for the old growth. And we don't have any time. Trees are being fallen as we speak, potentially, if not today, but like tomorrow, and all, like, they're out there. So we literally don't have the time. And I do think that I fully agree. We need to tax the resources of the RCMP in every way, shape, and form. And we need, because you're right, like the reality is that, like, I will say, like, over the last couple of weeks, that things are starting to hit the media, but there's a lot of propaganda about Fairy Creek. There's a lot of you know, Teal Jones is starting to pipe up a little bit more, and, you know, the propaganda that's out there isn't what we need. Yeah. And so I I'm in full agreement, and I think that we need to hit the streets more in large numbers, and
I just want to weigh in on the emotionality aspect that Roger just mentioned. You know, there is such an emotional part to it. And when I was up at Fairy Creek, you can't resist it because the forests are right there and they're so beautiful and the energy just penetrates you. And then you look at the clear cut and you feel like you're going to vomit because it's just so painful. And I think that part of the success, in my opinion, of seeing Fairy Creek is just, it's so raw and right in front of you. It hurts. How do we get people who are living in the 9-to-5 city, go life to connect with that deep pain and emotionality of this climate and ecological crisis and biodiversity crisis? How do we get them to feel that in the city and take action?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, or is it an action in the city?
I was personally thinking some of this, I don't know if you guys have all seen some of the structures up at Fairy Creek. They're phenomenal. Like the tripods and the boat pirate ship thing. Like these structures are not only an excellent way to confuse, distract the RCMP and to bind yourselves to blocking a road. But one of the land defenders I spoke with up there said, you know, you're not going to find any barbed wire up here. You're not going to find anything that's aggressive, and it's all beautiful. It's all meant to be artistic and beautiful. And when you take it down, it should hurt, right? So I was just imagining what it would look like to bring all those tripods and put them in front of the legislature. Like, I don't know. Any other thoughts on how we can do that, Cheyenne?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great idea. And I think that it would be really beneficial to incorporate some Indigenous artwork and make this like a huge piece. And I think that like there are so many talented people and resourceful people at Fairy Creek and yeah, and I think that that would be great. I think that we could make some really cool structures, and I think that I can think of some people off the top of my head that I know that would be down to be able to yeah, to contribute to that. And yeah, I think that would be, yeah.
How are we doing for time? Zane, what time did you want to go into testimonials? Should we maybe talk about that now?
Well, we could continue for a few more minutes, and then in maybe 10 minutes we can do testimonials for people who've been arrested either on the streets or at Fairy Creek.
Okay, so Cheyenne and Roger, if there's some more thoughts on how we bring people together or this conversation, we'll talk for a bit more, and then we'll talk to some folks who've been arrested and get their testimonials.
Roger, I just have a quick question. So I'm becoming more familiar with Extinction Rebellion. But like, yeah, so like when we're talking about the, I think just kind of wondering, like, how do you guys sit down and collaborate, and how do you guys make plans, and how do you also, while you're making these plans, incorporate the movements as a whole? And do you do that not in like a public setting in case there's informants, or how do you, yeah, how are you guys going about thinking about moving forward with potential protests or blockades in solidarity, I guess, with other movements? And if this was something that you were interested in doing, how do I, yeah.
Yeah, well, just to answer that, like, there's a constant internal debate about how much, you know, how much it's necessary for a small bunch of people to come up with a coherent strategy, and how much you have to have, you know, buy-in from the movement, as it were. So that's not an easy balance to get right. But the situation UKXR is there's an action circle, and they take feedback from the movement, and then they come up with a design, and then they get feedback from it, and then they come up with a final design. And that's a sort of general design, which is open. Everyone knows about it. And then as you work down into specific designs, about which roundabout to take and what day and all that sort of stuff, then not very many people know what's going on for obvious reasons. So there's another balance there, as you might say. But it's trying to get beyond the sort of simple dichotomy of centralization versus decentralization, but try to be smart about it on what needs to be decided centrally and what needs to be decided decentrally, and also on the openness closeness debate. It's like what needs to be open in order to mobilize. People need to know what's going on, otherwise you can't mobilize. So on the other hand, obviously, in terms of the time you're going to turn up to a junction, you don't need to know that. You just need to arrive at a certain place. So I was going to say it's quite an interesting sort of example of capturing the national mood, the national attention with Insulate Britain at the moment that I've helped to design. And what's interesting about this, and it might be applicable to Vancouver as well, because it's basically 100 people have decided to go into unending rebellion against the government. So every day they go out and block motorways and block major roads in London. And it's the first time in the UK that a whole motorway network has been closed down by 7 or 8 groups. So they've gone from, within a few days, they were on the front pages of the papers, and they've been dominating the news now for 4 weeks. And the ask obviously is to insulate the houses because it's damp and all the rest of it in the UK, and lots of people die because their houses aren't insulated, and it's the fastest way to reduce carbon emissions. But what's interesting about it is they've just, through disrupting the economy, as it were, by having hundreds of thousands of vehicles not being able to get to work in the morning, everyone's talking about it, right? From the chat shows through to the BBC. And it's enabling this national debate to happen on what the hell we're doing about the climate crisis. So it's not so much about insulation. It is, but it creates, this sort of whirlwind effect, which is talked about, in various literatures, where you get the whole bloody country talking about it. And that's presumably what you want with Fairy Creek, right? You don't want this just to be a little thing out in the woods. You want half of Canada to be going, what are we doing cutting down wood? At this point, like, how mad is that? And the other thing that I think is sort of interesting is when Extinction Rebellion started, it was quite deferential and middle class sort of thing. And you go into interviews, and if people here have done interviews, the routine. They sort of, well, why are you disrupting people? And before you know it, you're down some rabbit hole. And what we've started doing, which is, we tried to do this at the beginning of XR, but we've really nailed it with Insulate Britain, is we're looking upon the media as a site of direct action. So you're not going into the interview to have a quaint chat about, protest politics. You're going into interview to push the obscenity of what's going on into the face of the interviewer. So we don't answer questions. We just go in and shout at them. And when they ask a question, we ask the question back. Why is the media not talked about this for 30 years? Why is wood getting cut down in Canada after 30 years or whatever, 100 years, whatever it is? You see what I mean? And we spend like hours and hours role playing in being in front of a host, because they're pretty evil characters, these people. So there's a potentiality there, which I think, like in the past, the environmental movement been far too deferential with the media, and this is you know, this has caused a big stir because, you know, they like to think everyone hates them, but 30% of the British public supports Insulate Britain. 65% now wants insulation to happen, right? This has happened over 4 weeks. And this has just been done by 100 people, right? And they haven't, we thought they were going to be put into prison, but they're scared of us, so they haven't put us into prison. But they're bringing in this injunction, I think, similar to what you've got in Canada, where they're going to put people in prison for 2 years and take their houses and take all their savings, right? And what we've said is, do your worst, because we're over this shit. And that's really shocked the country, because for 30 years, people go, oh, they back down, you know. Well, no one's backing down anymore, because we've been doing this for 2 years and people are as mad as hell, right? I mean, we've got such a shitty government, you can't believe it, but I think you know about that. It's just beyond bad. So, so I think there's potentially some, you know, something interesting. And, you know, it's not just in the UK. I think in Australia, like 20 people captured national headlines by burning prams in front of Parliament. And there's 7 young people who went on hunger strike in the German elections. And they've just got the Chancellor to have an open debate with them. So, you know, don't delude ourselves that we haven't got massive power. That's what I'm trying to say. Because post-COVID, people are starting to do whatever it takes. And that's a different ballpark, isn't it? You know, I mean, I've been doing stuff since I was 15. But, you know, it's like, this feels like a completely different time to anything that's gone before globally. And it would be wonderful to see the Fairy Creek, you know, win, basically, wouldn't it? You know, for all the reasons we all know. Anyway, you know, there's a bunch of leads there, aren't there, which may or may not translate to Vancouver, but potentially some of them do. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because we have like 92% of Canadians don't want to see the old growth being logged, but like here we are and it's being logged. And so while I hear you speaking and, you know, I think about all of the things that you're talking about there, it's like, well, maybe it does need to be more public, and maybe we do need to be out on the streets more. I mean, we are now, you know, we're making history. We at 1,100 arrests. This is the largest case of civil disobedience in Canadian history, but for some reason, it's still not enough. It's still not enough. There's still logging going on, and yeah. So I think maybe it's time to amp things up as we have trees falling in the forest. I mean, we're losing ecosystems that are 2,000 years old, you know.
Well, we've had this situation for decades, if not hundreds of years, where the elite basically runs the show and doesn't give a damn about what people think, right? And the answer to that is material resistance. Historically, that's what works. You know, it's like general strikes by workers and what have you earlier this last century. And what I think the only thing that's going to work is closing infrastructure down in cities. So I don't mean this quaint sort of stand in front of the Parliament and have a protest. Yeah. What I mean is to go to all the main roads through 20 affinity groups, and you go back day after day. And you know, you can see how that's just dominated the headlines in the UK, because no one thinks you're going to do it right, because they all think we're a pushover, don't they? And you know, at the end of the day, that's why they're carrying on, because there's no pressure. There's no pressure to counterweight the pressure of the corporate lobby, and that's because we're not doing it, basically. But yeah.
Could I just add something?
Yeah.
I've been watching all the Insulate Britain videos and everything, and they post all the interviews that they've done, and they are hilarious, because the Insulate Britain person will say, like, oh yeah, the country is going to collapse and everyone is going to be out of work and all the institutions are not going to work anymore because climate catastrophe is out of control. And then like the host is like, yeah, but you guys are causing a traffic jam. And it's just like, you know, like what planet are these people on? Like, I just told you that like the whole thing is going to collapse, and you're like asking me about a traffic jam. Like, yeah, it's just like this bizarro world that these interviewers are in. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
And the great thing is that is like 5 million people listening to that over their breakfast, right? So for the first time, millions of people are knowing that the country's fucked, fundamentally fucked, unless we sort this out. And, you know, it'd just be great, wouldn't it, to get 5 million Canadians coughing over their breakfast cereals in the morning, going, this isn't about a few trees. This is about the whole fucking system. You know, it's done if we don't sort this out. And we start with trees, right? That's pretty basic. 90% of Canadians want this to stop. So get the government to get on with it, right? And this is how it works, I think. But yeah, we you need to do loads of role playing, James.
Cheyenne, you have a point?
I just actually have a question. Like, I'm just curious, like, what has been your biggest turnout in Vancouver in terms of like people coming to help support and blocking roads and or other major like institutions or airports, or what are the biggest turnouts for that? And
Zane, you might have the numbers on that one, probably.
Well, recently, when the injunction was first granted, I think back in March, I think we said we would shut down the Cambie Street Bridge, and we had around 250 people there. So post-COVID, that's been the biggest turnout.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, COVID was definitely a challenge, but I think the main thing that we were lacking is just coming back every single day, and that's what this October rebellion is about, is 14 days just showing up and sitting down in the streets every single day.
And that's for fossil fuel.
The primary demand is to cancel all fossil fuel subsidies. End it. No more. We are not subsidizing fossil fuel anymore. But of course, each day is going to have different themes. We're going to be talking about old growth logging at Fairy Creek. We're going to be talking about the demands of Extinction Rebellion and all those things, which we'll get into as well. Sorry, Roger, you had a point?
Yeah, I'm getting a bit enthusiastic now. It's been a long day. So the other thing is, right, if you don't mind me saying so, is what we potentially have here is a synergy, right, between urban protest and traditional environmental protest in the woods, right? So the thing about synergies is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? So what I mean by that is if you come to the city and disrupt the city, it's not just the protest. It basically provides mobilization for people to go back to the woods, if you see what I mean, right? In other words, it creates a diversification of your mobilization strategy. So instead of it just being a closed sort of social media, who knows who, I don't quite know how the mobilization works. But the point is if you're on the news, like 3 or 4 nights a week in Vancouver, and on all your social media, you have Zoom calls where you're going, 100 people turn up and they go, I didn't realize this is happening in Fairy Woods, blum, blum, blum. Then you have a pathway to recruit people so that when you go back to the woods, you've got double the number of people, and then you come back to the city again, right? So you've got this alteration potentially. I mean, this could all be bollocks, right? So it's just a broad principle of how movements piggyback on each other for mutual benefit. And there's lots of historical examples of this. And I think that's another key reason for getting it in front of millions of people, because you only need 1 in 1,000, right, to go, I'm over this crap, how do I get involved? And you've got another 500, 1,000 people ready to go into the woods. I mean, obviously there's loads of logistical issues, but it's as I've been saying to a few Extinction Rebellion people in Canada and other places, the point of confrontation with the state is to mobilize for the next confrontation with the state, right? You see what I mean? We're looking at a series of iterations, and the more drama, the better. So, you know, there's thoughts there, isn't there, in terms of how to get a win-win, as you might say, out of the situation. Yeah, I'll shut up now. That's it.
Yeah, no, this is super important. Yeah, this is. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Because my wheels are always turning, and so it's just like, yeah, and this is super important stuff because, yeah, I'll also stop talking.
Sorry to be uber Canadian, but I totally pictured what you were saying as a hockey game, right? There, you have a strong defense. You absolutely do whatever it takes to prevent the puck from getting into the net, to prevent those trees from cutting down. You have this strong defense, but you also need a strong offense. We need to be going out there and provoking and being in the government's face every day, because they've gotten away with over a year of basically not commenting on this and pushing it aside. The NDP government have not spoken about this problem, considering how huge it is, and we need to get on the offense. And with Insulate Britain, with what the results that you guys have had in 4 weeks, that's so fast, that's so rapid. How can we get this strong result in 2 to 3 weeks? So I think we're going to go into a Q&A. We're going to have some breakout rooms. Do we want to do the testimonials next, just briefly, if people want to talk about their arrest experience and why it's important to be arrested?
I think Brent is going to go.
Okay.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Great. Yeah, so it's a real honor to be on this call with people like Roger and Cheyenne and everyone else here who has sacrificed everything. I'm 57, I still have a job, and so I haven't gone as far as people like Roger and Cheyenne and given up everything. So, but I have been arrested 5 times in the last few years, and the reason that I do that is because it's not really because of climate change. I see climate change as a symptom of what's going on. The thing that really started me on the path was learning about, sorry, I'm a bit emotional, learning about like the nearly 70% of the biosphere that has disappeared since 1970. And to me, that is because of our philosophy of endless growth and extraction, and climate change is a symptom of that. So I would say that you either have this calling to make these sacrifices or you don't. And I think anyone who's on this call would have that. And so I encourage you, you know, to live a life of purpose. And as I see others here doing, and it will change you tremendously. And I just want to say that if there are people here from Fairy Creek who are now in the city, that you really should form affinity groups within Extinction Rebellion and operate independently, but you know, with our help and support. And as long as you adhere to our principles, and you know, we'll be there to support you. And I think that when you can't be at Fairy Creek and you are in the city, we all need to be working together to ramp up the pressure, as Roger and Cheyenne have said. I guess I was supposed to talk about what being arrested is like, and it's really not that bad at all. It's pretty comfortable being arrested in the city of Vancouver, at least so far. And as I said, I've still maintained my employment and all that, and I'm always on that on that edge of doing what people like Roger have done, and give up my every means of support and just going full time into this. And yeah, thank you all. I guess that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Is there anyone else who wants to talk about their arrest experience? Zane, did you want to talk about it? Or I can weigh in as well. No? Okay. I'll just speak briefly, but I got arrested as well. It took me almost 2 years to come to this decision. I don't know why it took me so long. I think that there is a part of me that really didn't want to believe that the climate crisis was real, that there was some way I could just opt out of it. But any amount of research and listening to the science just completely reiterates that we are in dire circumstances. And I'm also getting emotional. The only person's opinion that I cared about getting arrested was my mom's. And so I asked her before I got arrested if I could have her blessing. And I told her everything that was going on with the climate emergency, although she's heard me talk about it for 10 years. I told her everything that was going on with Fairy Creek and that these ancient old growth forests are irreplaceable and that the government is not listening, and we're very quickly passing a tipping point that we might not be able to come back from. And so I asked her, if she'd be upset if I could have her permission to be arrested. And she didn't say yes. She said, "You have to." And that was a really big moment for me when I realized that the person who knew me the best was like, "You have to do this because you've been thinking about this and talking about this your whole life." Since I remember the Kyoto Accord when I was in grade 2 and talking to my classmates about this and global warming, and we're nowhere near where we need to be. And at this point, I don't see anything else. I see this as being a moral decision on whether or not we want to participate in this toxic system that is causing millions of people to die. And deaths are already happening, We look at the heat wave that we just had, this crazy Pacific Northwest heat wave where over 500 people died of heat-related deaths, and all those marine creatures cooked to death in the water, and the crop failures in Abbotsford with the raspberries. Like, this is all the stuff that they've been predicting, and we just watched it. It's here. It's the flooding in Germany and Belgium and in Hong Kong and in New York. It's the fires all across the Pacific Northwest, and it's people who are already being forced to flee and migrate. And yeah, so the decision to be arrested, it's basically which side of the line you want to be on. That's what it came down to for me. And in the moment, it was not scary. It was the right thing for me to do. So if anyone wants to talk to me or any of us about that decision, or if you have any questions, we also offer NVDA training with a lawyer. So you could talk to a legal assistant or a legal aid about what you need to consider for your job or anything. You can ask those questions. We do offer those trainings as well, so you can be fully prepared. But yeah, I think it was the right choice for me. Do we have anyone else on here who wanted to? Cheyenne? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to just touch on a couple of things, and and just coming from a kind of a different perspective, just with somebody of color. So, I just wanted to kind of touch on a couple different things, and just kind of what you were saying. Indigenous people have been on these lands for 14,000 years. We did not extract any of our land for natural resources ever. The land is part of our culture, so we've always been natural caretakers of the land and natural land defenders. We've always been there. And so for me, it feels like there is no choice but to stand up for the land. We are we're down to the last 2.7% of old growth, and so for me, there isn't an option. We don't have an option. And so for me, I will continue to stand up and to get arrested. Like I said, I think I've been arrested 7 times, and I will keep getting arrested, and I will always fundraise and figure out a way in order to be able to pay for my legal fees. But I also just want to talk about like being out on the front lines, and in all of my arrests, I've been treated different than any of my white identifying friends. And so, I will say that my arrests are empowering, and that when I do go through these moments, it is a stand against these colonial, capitalist, oppressive forces. And for me, it's like I will keep standing up to them, and there is power in that. And then there is also the targeting of BIPOC and Indigenous people. And I will say that my time at Fairy Creek, and I had two land defender friends that stayed at my house last night. They're on their way up right now to Unistoten, and so they are both white identifying, and so last night we talked a lot about the same conversation and how their thought perception before coming to Fairy Creek was much different, and seeing the way that Indigenous BIPOC people get targeted and abused by RCMP is a lot different than a lot of my Stettler friends. And I will say that in time, I had a lot of allies that would like create these like protective circles and barriers in between the RCMP. And so I just want to also talk about that on the front line, is that, also just becoming aware of white privilege. And this isn't to hurt anybody's feelings or make anybody feel different. It's just really coming to terms about the country that we live in, and that we live in a country that's built on genocide, and all of these systems that were formed during the the construction of Canada weren't for Indigenous people. And so as land defenders and activists, I just want to just bring that to light, is that like, if we're out on the front lines together, or you're out on the front lines with somebody that's BIPOC, using your white privilege as a means to be able to help other land defenders that could potentially get arrested in a violent way, could potentially seek longer penalties, and even be in police custody for longer. So just these things, it can be as simple as like reaching out and grabbing your BIPOC friend, sticking your body in front of them, and not saying that I don't want to get arrested, but sometimes like things can become a lot more violent in those situations. And so just kind of just want to say that piece. And but in the same breath, I don't have a fear of, well, there are certain police officers, I will say, that I definitely have a fear of, because I've seen them, they target and they come after. But I will say that, there's something empowering in getting out there and standing up to these oppressive colonial forces that continue to steal natural resources for money. So yeah, that was just one thing I wanted to talk about, and I'll leave that open. And if anybody has any questions or anything about that, like, I'm happy to answer. And once again, not coming from a place of wanting to hurt anybody's feelings, but just from my personal experience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention as well. And it's so true. One of the reasons I think it might also be worth people who are white identifying considering getting arrested is it shouldn't constantly be Indigenous people who are being put in jail to defend the land and the water, that we all have this benefit and privilege to live on and play on and have food in abundance. And we are seeing Indigenous land defenders, like you said, getting way more jail time and getting treated badly by the police. And it's time for us to step up and put our bodies in front of theirs and put our bodies on the line and be willing to self-sacrifice, as much as there's energy in going out there with a sign and doing things, that's great. But when we self-sacrifice, when we kind of are willing to give up a bit of our liberty for this cause, that it's serious, where are we at in terms of this, in terms of time? Do we want to break out into some groups? We are at 1:17. Maybe we just do one breakout group, popcorn style. Zane?
I was just wondering if people have any questions, and then maybe we could do Q&A. Breakouts after that.
Yeah, we might be able to do it all as one group as well, but let's go with questions. And then we had some really good ideas on how to bring these two strategies together. I'm curious what people have thought about. But any questions for Chey-Anne or Roger? Maybe just raise a finger or unmute yourself, and then the next person who has their hand up will go after you. Brent?
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to ask Cheyenne about Clayoquot Sound and the victory there, that and how that informs her thinking on what they're doing at Fairy Creek, and if there's any worries about having these kinds of victories, but in the big picture, not ultimately being successful.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, there was victory at Clay Club, but I think that there were a lot of land defenders that actually ended up doing a lot of jail time. There were children that were actually taken away from their parents and never returned. So there were definitely some victories within that. And I think, you know, one of the first things that comes to my mind is like Indigenous sovereignty. And so it's really coming in, and it's like, it's a land back movement too. So when we think about what's best for the community, I don't think that, like, you know, having a provincial park is something that's kind of a colonial thing. It's not, you know, and so I think, like, I would love to see Fairy Creek win, and I would love it to come. And I do know that from Elder Bill Jones and one of the other land defenders, her name is Pally, and she is she's Pacheedat, and so a lot of talk about a cultural center for in those lands, for being able to come and forage off the lands and being able to hunt and having more of a cultural space. And so for me, that would be a win. Really, always coming back to what, you know, what Indigenous people want for their lands. And so for me, when I think about that, I think there's a huge win. And then, yeah, within Clay Club, yeah, there's wins. And then, yeah, but I mean, I guess this is also, to touch on that, I think that this is maybe something as land defenders that we are willing to do, is to potentially take some jail time and stuff like that. And so I guess maybe it could, in some eyes, it could be a win in that aspect. But did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thanks.
I have a question for, I guess for Roger. I'm just curious about these acts of civil disobedience where we're disrupting people in their daily lives, blocking roads, whatnot. In your experience, because there's a lot of conversations here about doing this in the city, and it always comes up that, well, if you inconvenience people, then it's so easy for them to brush you off. It's like, oh, you're just an inconvenience. And our government has done such a beautiful job of deflecting this whole issue the whole time. And so for them to just, they'll just deflect, oh, it's just those rabble rousers from Fairy Creek, right? Okay, we make it more, we make it bigger, we make it about the old growth, we make it about Indigenous sovereignty, we make it about climate crisis. We shift the narrative away from Fairy Creek, that takes care of that. But still, this aspect of inconveniencing people as a tactic, do you find that it brings more people on board than it alienates? And is it effective in that way?
Yeah, well, it's quite a complicated issue, but in my mind, it's a total no-brainer to go and disrupt again and disrupt the public. And the strategic reason for that is nothing gets attention better than disrupting the public. That's why you get the media attention, because you're not disrupting something away from the public. So that's like a strategic reason. But I think, like, there's a deeper moral reason, right? Like, we live in this, like, you know, we're sold this narrative of a sort of superficial democracy where, you know, if you upset people a little bit, it's a wrong thing to do. Like, that's bollocks as far as I'm concerned, morally. You're disrupting people because we're part of a moral community. We're not isolated individuals. We have responsibilities to each other. We have responsibilities to those that came before us. We have responsibilities to the next 1,000 generations that comes afterwards. And you are not an independent agent. You're complicit in this genocidal project, in so much as you're not engaged in your responsibilities as a citizen in this time. That's a really powerful new narrative, you see what I mean? So that's really, for me, like, that's the moral justification. And then the other thing is as I said, with Insulate Britain, like, you know, as far as the media is concerned, everyone thinks we're twats, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? Because everyone who changes history, people think they're twats at the time. You know, the suffragettes did fucking loads of things, then everyone hated them, you know. Like a good example is ACT UP in New York in 1990, right? They went and closed down the stock exchange. Had nothing to do with gay guys, you know, dying in the corridors of New York hospitals. They closed down New York Stock Exchange because they were saying, fucking wake up, right? Society, this shit thing is happening and you have to pay attention, right? That's, do you see what I mean? It's about a national moral debate. And that's a profoundly democratic situation where a society starts looking in the mirror and going, what are we doing here? You know, what are we doing on women's rights? What are we doing with gay guys dying in hospitals? What are we doing with betraying our children, right? You wouldn't dream of doing it, you know, to get a 1% pay increase or something, right? But when it's an issue of existential crisis, of total immorality, you're 100% justified in closing the whole damn thing down. And that's what that has to be combined with, is this ruthless like rage in the interview space, right? Because if you're going to close down the whole of Vancouver, you've got to have a good damn excuse, right? And you've got a good damn excuse, right? Which is the last 2.5% of trees in this country are getting cut down, and that's obscene. You see what I mean? And you have to go into that interview and take it over and make it 100% clear that this is obscene, right? Unless you're out of your fucking head, this is obscene. And you swear at them, right? And like, you know, the environmental movement in the UK, it's just been a little bit like Canada, right? It's been quite, you know, nice and middle class and so on. Those days are over, right? You know, we've got a bunch of working class people in Britain, and they're just taking the media apart because they're from a culture where you don't take shit, you know. And it's interesting. It's really interesting. So, you know, there's no point closing down the public unless you've got a good routine, right? But you know, that's what making history is all about, is pissing people off. If you don't get that, then you don't really understand the basics, really. That's how it always worked, and it always will work. Yeah, and you know, throwing a bit of humor, always useful. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just hearing that sort of like claiming the moral authority, right? It's like we have an obligation, and we're doing this in service to something greater than ourselves. And so we're claiming the moral authority to break laws. We're claiming the moral authority to fuck shit up because shit needs.
Yeah, because this country belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the corporations, right? Yeah. So we've got something. I mean, go and look at the French, right? The French close their country down every 2 or 3 years. Why is that? Because they think that country belongs to them. It doesn't belong to the elites. That's why they had about 5 revolutions, right? You know, that's why the corporate elite in France don't get anywhere. Because as soon as they start fucking things up, they're out in the streets with their tractors and they close everything down. Like, you know, it's got its pros. You know, there's a lot of tricky things about France, but they know how to cause disruption in order to maintain the Republican values that they, you know, they set themselves up for. Right? You know, it's you get the country, you know, you get the country that you deserve. You know what I mean? In a way, yeah. Don't want to sound funny about that, but it's yeah, that's how it works, as far as I can see, as a social scientist.
I'm gonna call on Ivan, who's got his hand up. I just want to comment one thing. The other thing about what you said is that we're doing it non-violently, and you know, if we wait until climate collapse is at our doorstep and we're suffering from economic collapse and social collapse, it's going to be war. it's going to be devastating. And it already is. It's devastating on many different groups of people who are facing the brunt impact, who did not contribute to this problem. And they are seeing violence. They're seeing all this stuff. So us sitting down in the road and stopping the road is a non-violent revolution. We're not going to wait till there's a war, right? Yeah. Okay. So sorry, Ivan's got his phone, his hand up. Sorry, go ahead, Ivan.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a very general, broad question. Anyone who had, like, the XR Toronto group is very small, a lot smaller than it should be. And I was looking for any tips you guys had on recruiting and expanding quickly in a big city.
Yeah, does someone want to speak to that, Roger, or maybe Zane?
Well, I'll just say quickly, because I've talked enough, but I'll just say quickly, like, the state of the art's written down, as it were. So we've taken, like, you know, nuggets of wisdom from Germany and Australia and various other places. But I think I sent Zane like 8 pages on it or something. But yeah, the basic idea is to do Zoom calls and do public meetings, and you do mass leafleting, and you get some, you know, you just need to be out there, and then, you know, have the meetings and have pathways to action into the different working groups, and do that during the rebellion or during the contestation, as it were. And yeah, we're looking forward to the Canadians, you know, taking the process further.
Emily?
Hi, pleasure to be here. I have a question regarding the nonviolence. So from what I've been seeing, I'm back and forth at Fairy Creek. I think some people maybe don't know that our words can be violent. And there's a number of people I've spoken to that aren't going back to Fairy Creek because of lateral violence. Is there any recommendations that you would have so that we can respect one another as protesters a little bit more?
That's a really great question. Would anyone like to speak to that? I could say briefly that I think that coming together as a community and engaging in these type of trainings is really going to help, like engaging in these talks, to reiterate that, yeah, people going up there should be strictly nonviolent and practice that as best as they can with their words and engagements too, because it's about how we treat each other. It's about how we treat Indigenous land defenders. It's even, you know, a level of respect for the RCMP. I know that some people are like, you know, why do you guys talk to the cops? And we have respect for everyone. We treat everyone with respect. That's part of our principles and values when with XR, just to maintain that nonviolent baseline. So people are going up there on a whim. I think that training is going to help. Engaging in these conversations and community conversations would help. But yeah, I think, Cheyenne, do you have, maybe want to speak to that if there's anything to add?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, like, I'm sorry to hear that, Emily. And I've definitely have heard this in the past about lateral violence. And I think that, you know, and sometimes these things don't get brought up to different types of leadership, and sometimes it can be hard within decentralized movements to identify what kind of leadership is there and who that can be. And so I can't really speak to the certain situation. And I mean, it sounds like an unfortunate event, and I never, yeah, there can't be lateral violence. These things can't happen. And so, yeah, I think, you know, for me, yeah, I wish that I was there so I could help be a mediator and try to liaison to try and help that. But yeah, I think that like, definitely these trainings are helpful, having conversations in the moment and finding out who leadership is in order to create there to be a safe space. What I've seen work at Fairy Creek in the past is that that quite often there can be more like that these issues of lateral violence, when they're brought up, is finding a leadership and then creating a safe space. So quite often how I've been in circles and different situations before is that when these things are brought up, that there are more than one individual that so that there is accountability for that individual, creating a space where people can be able to sit down and talk and hopefully come to some sort of an like an I don't know what the word is I'm trying to say, but just so that there's mediation and an end result, for lack of better words. I'm trying to think of a word, but I can't get to it. I feel differently about the police. Like, I'm not there to talk to them or to be friends with them. So I think that that can be kind of more of a white perspective of wanting to have, I'm not out to be violent to our CMP, but I'm also not there to establish relationships with them. And I know that most BIPOC people will feel the same. I also feel that when people are creating relationships and stuff like that, it can create an unsafe space for BIPOC. And so I think that perspective is different from person to person, but I feel that it's best that we don't talk to cops, that we don't create relationships with them, because it can backfire onto BIPOC. And quite often as white identifying people, we don't identify that in the moment. It's like we get used to creating these comfortable relationships that can backfire onto other people. So that's just one of my perspectives, which is not about the lateral violence, but just, creating, I don't know if that helps at all, Emily, but a tough situation. So sorry.
I guess just trying to hold a safe space when we see that happening for people to be heard and seen. The more people that can probably step up to that role when they're there would be probably helpful. And I did want to comment on the police as well. I agree with you. I've seen other BIPOC members go into their trauma when they start to see other white folks continuing conversation with police, because it makes them feel unsafe. So we don't have to be violent with our words with the cops, but we also don't have to talk with them either. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, that's perfect clarity as well. It's in terms of respect, it doesn't mean forming a relationship with the police. It just means, not physically having an altercation with them or spitting on them or saying violent things that would also make them more aggressive, which can also be taken out on Indigenous land defenders and BIPOC folks. So maintaining respect, maintaining a strict sense of nonviolence, and preaching that to everyone. I want to honor everyone's thank you. I want to honor everyone's time commitment as well. We are at 1:30, but I feel like we could keep talking about this so much. And we didn't even get to the part where we talk about the ideas of how we come together. So what I'm thinking is, if people would like to continue this conversation, at the bottom, you can, in the chat, direct message probably Brent your email address, because then if you put it on everyone, we'll all see it. So you can just click direct message. Brent, are you okay with that, with collecting email addresses? If people would like to be informed of those upcoming trainings, or if we want to continue this conversation, we also, someone was asking about how we do planning. We have an app called Mattermost for Extinction Rebellion anyway, which, if you're interested in getting involved with planning, is like similar to Slack, in that you have different channels and you can form different groups and you can talk about what's going on. So send us your email, direct message to Brent, if you would like to be informed about more upcoming actions or be added to Mattermost. And let's just maybe do some final thoughts. Zane, do you have any dates for trainings or anything that we want to tell people about while they're typing their emails into the chat?
Yeah, so yesterday we did a press conference about the October Rebellion, and so I just wanted to pitch the purpose behind it, which is that on the 1st of November, there's going to be COP26 happening in Glasgow. And our demand for this rebellion specifically is for the federal government to end subsidies for fossil fuels. So on the 16th of October, we're meeting in Nelson Park at 12 p.m. This Saturday, and we're going for 2 weeks. Every day we're blocking a major intersection or a major bridge. Leading up to the 25th, we're blocking the airport. A day before that, we're blocking the Trans-Canada Highway. And we're ending on the 29th. And the idea is that if the federal government doesn't end subsidies, then the prime minister being at COP is looking at a really embarrassing record of, like, I don't know, 100 arrests being made or something like that in the city. So that has an impact on the government's reputation. So I would encourage people to come down to Nelson Park if they're in Vancouver on the 16th.
Diane, can I put it to you as well? What can people do to support Fairy Creek, to get supplies up there? Is there any resource information you want to share that people should know?
Yeah, oh, sorry, I'm trying to unmute, but I'm already muted. Yeah, there are definitely many ways that we can support Fairy Creek. So right now, we definitely need like food supplies. There's like fresh produce. And I think actually what I would like to do is just double check, because we've had a switch on how things are going, because last week our land defenders needed like dry packaged food for hiking. So just like add water and the food was made. I can't think of the word of those kind of foods, but so I wonder if there's a way that I is there like a channel that I can email everybody about that? Because I just would like to check in, because we have like a supply and chain command. And so I just want to see about, I was reading yesterday, we have a kind of a group chat, and on one of our group chats, they were kind of trying to change the way that things were coming in to try and target the needs of certain land defenders, because right now we're getting an influx of donations of tents and sleeping bags and things like that. But I think right now we kind of have a bit of a surplus, but then there are certain needs from each land defender that are up on the front lines that might need more needs. But we definitely always need like fresh food and produce and donations. There is a donation page on the Rainforest Flying Squad page. There's also a link on the Fairy Creek page as well. And also there's also for Indigenous land defenders, there's also a fundraiser going for them as well. I'm also starting a private thing for myself as well, just because I've been out on the front lines for almost 5 months and I'm making no money, and I'm trying to get warmer stuff for myself. So those are kind of direct actions that can be done. And is there a way?
I think I've just put the link to the Fairy Creek Supplies Needed Facebook page.
Thank you. That's great.
You can start with that, and if there's
yeah, and I think
make sure the link works. Yeah, I think it does.
I'll do the same as well. Just double check on that. Yeah.
So I will be posting this video on our social media channels, so I can put links to all of these fundraising things on our social media with the video, if you want to send me those links.
That sounds great. Thank you. I will do that.
Great. Our email as well for Extinction Rebellion is outreach.xrvan. I'll post that at protonmail.com. I'll post that in the chat. So if you have any follow-up questions, we'll give you our email address. And we do have a Fairy Creek channel, Fairy Creek and Old Growth Logging channel on Mattermost as well. So anyone who's rallying to send supplies or go up there can talk amongst themselves on that channel. Roger, did you have any final thoughts on this conversation and what we're doing here in West Coast of Canada?
No, but it's really nice to be invited, and thank you so much. It's really nice to see some of you again. It's really nice to meet you, Cheyenne. And yeah, I suppose my little scheming mind is going like, oh, we should have a chat about designing something. So, you know, maybe a little bit more sort of casual get together and see, you know, just shoot the breeze a bit, think about some bigger strategic things. And, you know, if that sounds like a good idea, I'd be happy to do that. And just wishing everyone the best of luck with everything that you do. Thank you so much. Thank you very much from the UK, because we need you guys. Everyone needs everyone around the world, right? We all need each other. You know, we're not alone. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. I think it would be great. Maybe we'll set a date for another one of these conversations and we can just brainstorm ideas. How do we do this? How do we come together? What can we build? How can we set up tripods in front of the legislature or something of that nature? Awesome. All right. If people have to go, it is 1:45. You can go. There was a couple more questions, I think, that maybe if people want to linger and ask a couple more questions, those of us who can stick around, but to be respectful of everybody's time, thank you so much for coming to this conversation, and be safe out there. Rebel with love. Thank you so much to Roger. Thank you so much to Chey-Anne for being here and sharing your wisdom with all of us.
Just want to say thank you to everybody as well. I appreciate your time and listening to me stutter in the beginning. It's lovely to see everybody, and thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
It's all good.
And I hope to see you all out on like protesting together.
Do we have, I guess, can we continue to keep in touch with you and talk about Fairy Creek and maybe do another one of these conversations? I think that would be great. Okay, awesome. All right, I just noticed that Joseph had a question as well, or does anyone else want to throw in any final questions or comments before we go?
Actually, I was just...
Sorry, go ahead.
My hand was up just to speak briefly to the issue of lateral violence that was brought up. I've spent a lot of time at Fairy Creek and have witnessed a lot of that happening, and violence towards the police, like violence in words and action, or less in action, more in words, thoughts, emotions, all that. But it's, in my experience, like you touched on the aspect of trauma, and that's so important, is that having spaces to heal and integrate from trauma, because being on the front lines of Fairy Creek is traumatizing. We're like up against this like militarized force, and we're up against a system that, you know, we're all feeling the trauma of Mother Earth in all of this. And so that's playing out in so many different ways. And when I see the lateral violence, it's like, okay, I see someone acting out trauma. So I just wanted to bring that into the conversation around nonviolence and the importance of having spaces to heal and integrate that trauma.
Thank you so much for saying that, Joseph. It's so true, and I just want to honor you for saying that, because that's such a good point. You know, we all come from different places, and yeah, growing up and going through adulthood, there's a lot of traumas and triggers that can happen at any time. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you. Well, it's really nice to see you, Strawberry. I didn't know your real name, Chey-Anne.
I know, I didn't know yours either. So good to see you.
All right, any final questions? Or shall we call it night? Oh, sorry, Emily, go ahead.
All right, I have a quick question maybe somebody on here can help out with. I've heard that some of the Indigenous bands are looking to get money for programs such as like keeping language in schools, and they're maybe have been accepting it through logging funds. And I was wondering if Fairy Creek has a fundraiser for possibly getting funds for community Indigenous programs, so they're not reliant on such systems. Is that silly to ask here?
No, not at all. Not at all. So right now, I'm unsure actually if there's any fundraising going on for that purpose. There is talk right now about starting a fundraiser because there's this revenue share agreement that was made, and so there's a small amount of money, which I think is a couple $100,000, that Teal Jones is offering to the Pacheedat, and yeah, if I'm getting this wrong, just step in, Joseph. But I'm pretty sure it's only a couple $100,000. And so what I've heard over the last week is that there is a potential to start a fundraiser to be able to get that amount of money in lieu of what Teal Jones is offering. And so yeah, that's something that I've heard, but to touch on what you were just saying, I haven't actually heard of anything happening in that regard yet, but definitely some funds talking about fundraising, yeah, for the revenue share agreement. I guess to overshadow that.
Okay.
I would just add that I asked the same question in the spring when I was up at Fairy Creek. And I think that it was happening. There was a couple groups that were trying to fundraise for that. But it was complicated because they wanted to make sure that it follows Indigenous protocol. So not anyone can just kind of go up and sort of try and make those offers or negotiations. It has to go through the correct channels. And so I think just some like Rainforest Flying Squad members or other individuals were kind of hanging back because it just making sure that Indigenous protocol is followed. Because it's like, it seems like a lot of money, but in retrospect, it's actually not nearly the amount of money that they should be paid, of course, for the lands that have been logged for the last 30 years that they haven't been paid for. But that money is important to the band and to the Indigenous people and the programs like that you were saying. So I think that something was happening, but just making sure that it is appropriately presented and that kind of thing. That's what I heard last.
I'm just going to stop our recording now. So just to let you know.
All right. All right, guys.